Battle Royale is a 2001 Japanese movie about a class of high school students who are trapped on an island by their government and are told the only way for them to leave is to be the last man standing after everyone else is killed off. What would you do in this situation? Would you be one of the students who reluctantly plays by the rules of the game? Or do you refuse in hopes of finding another means of escape? Maybe you'd revel in the freedom, or maybe you'd realize the futility of escape and go out on your own terms. This is one of those movies that was stuck in my head for weeks after the first time I watched it, mostly due to the premise alone. But this movie didn't stick with me for the best reasons either. The violence is over the top, the dialogue is really corny, it's cliche as hell, and the acting is terrible. I mean, why does every other character die like this?
I say he dead.
But goddamn if this isn't one of the most fun movies I've ever seen. I've never read the novel the film was based off of, so I don't know how much liberty was taken when it comes to the movie's direction, but I do know the movie managed to turn a situation so tragic into a charming, campy experience that was still able to be thought-provoking. The film was wildly successful, becoming the third highest grossing movie of the year it was released in Japan, and as some of you might already know, Battle Royale has gone on to be a massive influence to some of the most popular franchises we've seen in the past couple decades. From movies to television to print, there's not really a medium that the Battle Royale genre hasn't seen record-breaking success in. Of course, there's video games as well, but where everything else is typically narrative-driven, the largest Battle Royale games tend to skip the story and get right to the core of what the genre is all about, which is being the last person to survive. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of these games, but as someone who does enjoy Battle Royale stories, I've always wanted to play a game that takes that premise and goes further with it than these. That's part of why I'm so glad to have discovered this game called Danganronpa, a PSP game about a class of high school students forced into a killing game where the only way for them to leave is to be the last person alive. That sounds kinda familiar, huh? Just like the film that started the genre and part of what this game takes inspiration from, I think Danganronpa is a shining example of how to do Battle Royale stories right. It deals with a varied cast of characters and their actions as a result of being put in such a hopeless situation, but a lot of the levity remains in the horror itself. Danganronpa has become a pretty prolific franchise with a few spin-off games, a few light novels, a stage play adaptation, some manga, cameos in other series, and an anime series of its own. But it all starts here with Trigger Happy Havoc. Now, I haven't played it in a few years, but I do remember it as a fascinating game, albeit a flawed one. And unfortunately, I've never been able to put what irks me about it into words. But I've also been wanting to replay the series for a while, and what better opportunity than now to share my thoughts, so why don't we start with where it all began? I don't think we can really do a review of Danganronpa justice without mentioning the creator Kazutaka Kodaka and how he started in the industry. He's always had a passion for video games, but like many other famous video game designers, his career in the field didn't actually start with games. Wanting to be a screenwriter, he went to school for film studies, but after a conversation with his professor about changing his career path from film to video games, his professor fortunately managed to help him get a job working on the survival horror PS2 game Clock Tower 3. When Capcom and Sunsoft were working on Clock Tower 3, they treated the development of this game like a film itself, actually getting a revered Japanese director, Kenji Fukasaku, to work on all of the game's cutscenes, and Kodaka was lucky enough to have his first job in the industry directly under him as one of his assistants. Let's see, what else did Mr. Fukasaku direct? Some period films about samurai, some horror films, I guess that would explain why they thought he was a good fit for Clock Tower 3, a bunch of Yakuza films, and So after Clock Tower 3 was released with praise for the game's cinematography and story, but with a lukewarm reception to pretty much everything else, Kodaka would get a different role in his next jobs, primarily working as a writer, and eventually he was hired by Japanese game company Spike. You actually might know them for making some of the most cherished Dragon Ball games, and from looking at their other history, it seems like they've had their hand in publishing everything, from licensed titles to RPGs to horror to Nintendo Wii shovelware, even Magical Girl ice skating games. But Kodaka, interested in making a game of his own, pitched a game called Distrust to Spike. It was intended to be a PSP release about a group of students forced into a killing game, but unfortunately Distrust was cancelled during development because it was deemed too violent and they figured it wouldn't be very profitable. However, it was picked up by Spike again when the game was reworked to soften up on both art style and tone for the purpose of being more appealing, and that's the game we know today as Danganronpa. So, as it turns out, Danganronpa is actually the second iteration of a game called Distrust that was about the same thing. But, I mean, it's clear Kodaka liked a lot of what they had with Distrust. It got far enough in development to see a beta prototype made, and we were lucky enough to see a fair bit of it. Character names, a major plot point, some character designs, all managed to make their way over to Danganronpa. But enough about the history of the game, why don't we see what it has to offer? It opens with a pretty dark but very stylistic intro that uses clips from the game's cutscenes, and we also get a peek at all the characters featured in the story. The title screen is pretty decent as well. I really like how there's someone new on the screen each time you start the game. Other than that, this title screen definitely looks Y2K enough to feel like something that came off of the PSP. There isn't much in the way of options when you initially start the game, but when you load from a save file, there's more for you to access, including a gallery where you can look at any cutscenes or artwork you want to see, or listen to any song. The first thing you actually see in the game is another cutscene, set in a dark creepy classroom with a cute black and white bear and what looks like a student or maybe teacher who's been tied up and blindfolded. The bear stares him down a bit and then presses the big red button in front of him, which makes a 3D rocket appear and launches the man into space, until it comes back down and all his bones fall out. It turns out this entire cutscene is an execution, which we'll be seeing a few more of throughout the game, but no clue on who that dude was and why he was killed so brutally. The story follows a boring, completely average student named Makoto Naegi who gets accepted to a private school called Hope's Peak. That's not just me insulting the character either, that's how he stands out to everyone in the story. Hope's Peak isn't just any school, it's an elite academy that chooses its own students, and it only accepts the best of the best. Leon, the ultimate baseball star, Sayaka, the ultimate pop sensation, Hina, the ultimate best girl. It turns out the only way a generic student like Makoto could make it into Hope's Peak is through a raffle, where he then becomes the ultimate lucky student. Weirdly though, when Makoto makes his way to the school, everything becomes loopy and he wakes up in an empty classroom with surveillance cameras and boarded up windows. Actually, windows bolted over with metal. There's also a note on the desk you wake up on with crude scribbles and handwriting that says, "Starting today, this school will be your entire world." After examining everything in the classroom, you're free to explore the eerie hallways of Hope's Peak. And why are these stairs blocked off? Why are these rooms taped off? I wouldn't say the game is scary. Really, with it being a game centered around a battle royale, this all seems par for the course. Our captors don't want us to go anywhere, but man, between the opening execution and everything we've seen since entering Hope's Peak, I think this game does a really good job setting the tone for everything else to come. We haven't even begun the killing game yet, but we've seen enough at this point to feel uneasy. You're trapped, your every move is being watched, every room is a little askew. I really love how this game starts. I also like how in every room you enter, everything in it pops up like a picture book or something. Anyways, when you make your way back to the main hall of the school where everything originally started twisting and turning, you see the entrance has now been locked up with what looks like a metal hatch you'd see in a bank vault, and turret guns, I'm guessing, to shoot anyone that tries to escape. This is also where you finally meet and greet the 14 other ultimate students of Hope's Peak for the first time. Some of them are really friendly like Sayaka, but with everyone here being ultimates, you have some standoffish or arrogant students like Byakuya. This guy is pretty much Seto Kaiba cranked to 11.
You get out of my life and take your bad hair with you!
You know what? Characters are very important in this game due to the nature of this story, so let's just go through them all. I already mentioned the ultimate lucky student and player character Makoto Naegi and the ultimate pop idol Sayaka. Apparently she was Makoto's classmate in the past before Hope's Peak and he didn't even recognize her. I also mentioned Leon, the ultimate baseball star, although he apparently wants to be a rock star now, which explains his drastic change in appearance. There's also Kiyotaka, the ultimate moral compass. He's just a boy scout that tries to keep everyone on the straight and narrow. And we can't forget everyone's favorite rich boy, Byakuya. Celestia, the ultimate affluent progeny. He's from the Togami family, a conglomerate that's apparently powerful enough to influence the world. And there's also Hifumi, the ultimate fanfic creator. He's a pervert. There's Yasuhiro, the ultimate clairvoyant. He's a really laid-back guy with cool hair and poor money management skills. The exact opposite of Celestia, the ultimate gambler. She's cold, she's cunning,
She's all that.
she's not afraid to speak bluntly, but she's really good at hiding her true feelings as well. Same with Kyoko, the ultimate... Actually, we don't know her ultimate talent yet. I mentioned Hina before as well. She's the ultimate swimming pro. Her cheerful personality helps her grow close to Sakura, the ultimate martial artist, who is not as aggressive as she looks. There's Toko, the ultimate writing prodigy. She's the obligatory which is the anime girl archetype that likes to be used and abused and ordered around like an actual dog. I feel like it exists, but I don't know the word for it. Anyways, that's Toko. She's obsessed with Byakuya, and she's also the only character whose Distrust designs I really preferred. There's Junko Inashima, a blondie fashionista. She's a worldwide famous gyaru. And there's Chihiro Fujisaki.
I'm Chihiro Fujisaki.
The ultimate programmer. She's timid, but very kind, too kind for this situation. And finally, there's my personal favorite character, Mondo, the ultimate biker gang leader. He's a delinquent and a hard ass, and he's very quick to anger, but underneath it all he still has morals and a code of honor, and he has a cool orange pompadour, and he doesn't remind me of anyone in particular, I promise. Props to the concept artist, by the way. Everyone's specifically designed to fit their talent, and I really like the way they're all illustrated in this game. I'm not an artist, but I think it's his technique of shading and attention to detail on things like wrinkles and hair that really makes his style stand out. The anatomy can look a little funky at times in some of these sprites, but it's nothing I can't overlook. Like I said though, I'm not an artist. I would love to see someone who actually knows what they're talking about do a breakdown of this game's art. Anyways, after getting to know everyone, you find out they all lost their memory and woke up somewhere in the school as well. Soon enough, a sudden announcement comes on the monitors and you're all told to go to the gym where you meet the final character and headmaster of the school for the first time. And what do you know, it's the same bear from the opening cutscene. His name is Monokuma, and that smile is permanently etched on his face. I think lovable jerk despot is a good way to describe him. He's a really diabolical little guy with a sarcastic sense of humor, and you can probably figure he's the one that introduces you all to the killing game. Of course, no one is willing to play Monokuma's sick game, but no one wants to spend the rest of their lives here either, so it turns out the only way to leave the school is to participate in the killing game. But it's not a last man standing situation, at least not directly. All someone would have to do was kill one other student discreetly. The murderer then becomes something called the Blackened, and when the dead body is found by the other students, a class trial is held to determine who the Blackened is. If the class guesses right, then the Blackened is executed and everyone else is allowed to live life as is and hope speak again. However, if the class guesses wrong, everyone else is executed and the Blackened is free to leave the school. Or graduate. Just in case I was making it sound like there's some way to circumvent the killing game and by extension the game's entire story. There isn't. People die. A lot of them. Characters you grow attached to are gonna be killed. Or killed and then be killed themselves. Maybe some of them even. After meeting Monokuma, he hands you an e-handbook and the prologue concludes with the game's intro. The e-handbook is really handy. It has a map of Hope's Peak that you can fast travel with and the report cards of other students that keeps track of their personal information and how much you've bonded with them. It keeps track of all the mono coins you obtain as well. You'll find these little things hidden all around the school and you can use them to play the Mono Gachapon machine. Each capsule has a different present inside, and for every pull you gain a slightly higher chance of pulling a duplicate. However, for each coin you put into the machine, the better the chance you have of getting something new. I'm not gonna spoil what it's for, but if you do decide to play this game, keep pulling on the machine until you get number 91 of Man's Fantasy before chapter 3 starts for a hidden scene. Besides that, the e-handbook has an option called Truth Bullets. These Truth Bullets come into play a little later with the killing game's class trials. I was already hooked with the premise of the story, but this is what really sold me on Danganronpa the first time I saw it. When a murder happens, the game enters something called Deadly Life and becomes reminiscent of the Ace Attorney series, with time to investigate the crime scene to build your case, and question other characters to hear their testimonies. Instead of cross-examinations, Danganronpa has non-stop debates where everyone tries to figure out the case together, and if someone says something that sounds funny or contradicts the known details of the case, you can actually shoot at that text with the truth bullets. Yeah, truth bullets is just a fancy name for the evidence you find during the investigation phase. The only ways to fail the class trials is by contradicting the wrong piece of information or using the wrong truth bullets too many times. And you can run out of time as well, but they give you so much of it that it's unlikely to happen at any point. The non-stop debates are about all it lifts from Ace Attorney though. There's no pressing to make anyone elaborate on what they're saying, but sometimes you can highlight an important piece of information one of your classmates has said and use that to contradict something else. You can also shoot at this pink text to gain a little time. In addition to the non-stop debates, there are other mini-games like Hangman's Gambit, where you have to recall an important piece of information by shooting these letters individually to write out something at the bottom of the screen. There's one infamous Hangman's Gambit in the second trial when you find out one of the students has a split personality, and I'll spoil it, the answer to piece it all together is schizo, a different personality disorder from the one they're hinting at the entire time. The first time I played Danganronpa, I got stuck here for a while, but it's such an absurd answer that I haven't forgotten it since. There's also the bullet time battles, which is a rhythm minigame where you aim, shoot, and reload to the beat of the soundtrack. These usually happen at the end when the culprit or someone who knows vital information is cracking. And finally, there's the closing arguments. Here, Makoto just recaps the entire murder together piece by piece in this cool stylized comic book after everyone has all the details. For the most part, I think the class trials are way too easy. Keep in mind, I already beat this game once before, so I knew how everything played out in each trial, but even on my first playthrough, I don't recall this game giving me a lot of trouble. I beat it twice for this video, once on normal and once on the hardest difficulty, which I prefer, and the only times I really took damage was at my own incompetence in the controls. It's not that who killed who is obvious, but the game holds your hand way too much through these trials. The contradictions and non-stop debates are too obvious if you're paying attention, and the few times I did get stumped trying to contradict something, it wasn't because my train of thought was wrong, the game just didn't want me to pursue that in the class trial yet. Hangman's Gambit gives you a letter or two to start with, which practically gives you the answer to each one. All you need for bullet time battles is good rhythm. I mean, the game can give you a little challenge with these sometimes by blocking the little bubbles you're supposed to press to the beat to, but you have a broken ability you can activate at any time when this happens that lets you mash as much as you want with no care at all, and it still goes because the game does. You don't even have to use that really, because it's not hard to keep the rhythm in your head without using visual aid. And all of that's without mentioning the skills you get from other students as well. Each day the game gives you moments of free time when the story slows down and you're free to bond with any students you want. You can give them a gift from the school's Mono machine, and in return they give you passive skills you can use to your benefit in the class trial. It's just stuff that makes it so you have more health or deal more damage, but like I said already, the trials are a cakewalk. These skills don't hurt to have, but they barely help. I'm also not a huge fan of how Makoto seems to be the only one that can solve anything in each class trial. I mean, there are times when other characters will know crucial details about the case, or even who committed the murder before the class trial starts, but it's down to Makoto to figure all this out because he's the protagonist. There's only one time in the game I think it was fine a character didn't say anything crucial, and that's because it was actually part of their plan to fail the class trial and kill everyone, but usually they're holding back from solving these cases because inconsequential narrative reasons won't allow them to divulge anything. I mean, these guys are all ultimates. Some of them might be a little quirky, but they aren't idiots. I'd expect some of them to contribute a little more when everyone's lives are on the line, you know? I know it's just a game, so the player should have a lot of agency when it comes to solving these cases. It's just more than a little annoying when you realize it falls on Makoto to solve all of these cases. This is one of the things I think the anime really handled better. The characters back and forth to piece the evidence together and solve the murder cases feels more believable because Makoto isn't the only character that seems to solve everything. All my complaints about these class trials aside, it's still fun to piece the murders together, and it's rewarding too. You get to see a cool new execution for each class trial you successfully complete, and Monokuma unlocks a new floor in the school. And for each floor you unlock, you learn something new that unravels the true story behind Hope's Peak just a little bit more. Like maybe a photo of better times, or a hidden room filled with documents Monokuma can't surveil you in because there aren't any cameras. In a weird way, I kinda found myself wanting more characters to die. I mean, I didn't want to see anyone die because I found myself grown attached to a lot of them, but unfortunately that seems to be the only way to progress.
It was totally obvious before that you were trying to make yourselves feel better and justify what you did.
All by Monokuma's design, of course. This leads into one of the smaller details of the game's story that I do really like. Monokuma is more clever than he lets on. That hidden room you think he doesn't know about? Of course he does. And that laptop you guys managed to hack into the school system with in hopes of finding something you can use to your benefit. Come on, he knows. All of this is being teased by Monokuma because it gives the students of Hope's Peak, well, hope that they might eventually get to see the outside world again. And without hope, there's no soil for the seeds of misery and hopelessness to grow into that despair that Monokuma loves so much. If there's one thing I think Danganronpa handles well, it's despair, or specifically hope versus despair. To me, hope versus despair in the case of Danganronpa isn't black and white, or good and evil, or pacifist and murderer. It's who gives up on leaving the school and who doesn't. How they get there differs between each student, but between everyone who gives into the killing game and everyone who's determined to find a way out of the school that doesn't involve murder, they all maintain their hope of escape, at least initially. The way I interpreted it, true despair would be giving up and resigning your entire life to living inside Hope's Peak as you realize how pointless it is to even attempt escape. You know, that's what I really like about Danganronpa having a rich cast of characters to play with. It's fun seeing just how everyone reacts in the face of despair. Some of these guys break completely. You see friendships turn to rivalries. Monokuma forces them to answer the question of what matters more, your freedom or your morality. That's what this game explores so well, and that's what I really love about Danganronpa so much. But I have a large problem with this game as well, or at least one, or I guess two. One of its characters, and I don't know if I hate them as much as I am just conflicted on whether or not they're a good character. This rant is gonna go deep into spoiler territory from the very beginning of the game, so if you don't want to be spoiled, go to this time. Throughout the story, you'll hear about this worldwide tragedy called The Tragedy. Not much is known about it, but the world is fucked, and of course Monokuma played a part. In fact, the world is so corrupted now that the cameras in the school aren't only there to surveil you, they're there for Monokuma to televise the killing game for the entire world's enjoyment. The tragedy apparently started a year before the events of the main game, but wait, the world was normal before we entered Hope's Peak and we didn't see anything like this. So, do you remember when everything went loopy at the beginning of the game and Makoto woke up on a random desk? It turns out between those two events, not one, but 2 entire years had passed. In the first year, Hope's Peak was actually a normal school for Ultimate students and everyone actually got along pretty well. They all enjoyed their lives in the school so much that when the tragedy started, sometime around the beginning of their second year, they all followed an ambitious plan by their headmaster, Jin Kirigiri, to shut the school off from the outside world. The goal of course being to protect all the students. But hell, they didn't only agree to spending the rest of their lives in Hope's Peak, they were the ones who set up the cameras and steel barricades to seal the school off. Things were fine in the school for a while, but what Jin unfortunately didn't know was the reason for the tragedy starting in the first place was hidden as a student in this class the entire time. It was none other than Junko Enoshima, the ultimate despair. She was working behind the scenes for an entire year designing Monokuma and plotting the killing game, beginning with the execution of Headmaster Jin. Back in the present day, Junko was actually one of the first students to die for going against one of her own rules and assaulting Monokuma. But after that, the killing game has gone on until there were only 6 survivors left. Makoto, Toko, Hina, Hiro, Byakuya, and our closest ally, Kyoko. Just as well, a seventh unknown victim is found and one final class trial is held to determine not only who killed them, but who this person is. The only reasonable suspects are Makoto and Kyoko, as they don't have great alibis, and from here the game branches off into two endings. In the first one, Kyoko is found guilty and everyone just spends the rest of their lives in Hope's Peak. I guess it's up to the player to decide if this ending is for the better or worse considering the state of the world and everything. However, if you pursue the true ending, you get an ending where Makoto is falsely found guilty of killing the masked victim and he's actually sent to be executed. Surprise, Monokuma cheats at his own game to get what he wants. But Makoto is saved before being executed and an extended trial is held where Junko reveals herself to still be alive and the true killer of the masked victim, Mukuro Ikusaba, the 16th student, the ultimate soldier, and the twin sister of Junko. She was helping Junko every step of the way from starting the tragedy to running the killing game. She was even hiding in plain sight the entire time by posing as her sister Junko, and eventually she died by Junko's own hands. Now, when you figured all this out, Makoto realizes his true talent is the ultimate hope. Everyone bonds together in one big cheesy, impactful moment of friendship to save him, and Junko abides by her own rules of the class trial, executing herself. Junko easily embraces death with open arms because her ideology lives on, and although her plan to eradicate all hope in the school failed, she still gets to feel complete despair as she herself dies. And thankfully her death finally puts Monokuma out of commission since there's no one to control him, and everyone left is able to leave Hope's Peak, finally able to see the outside world again with their own eyes. And that's the story of Danganronpa. I know it's not all in reveal order, but I hope I got the important details on this plot right. For the most part, I think it's a pretty nice story, but I'm completely split on Junko as a villain. At first I hated her. The amount of bullshit they let her get away with that goes completely unanswered and you're supposed to accept for the sake of the plot is really annoying. When this game was finished, Kodaka had no plans to make a larger universe out of Danganronpa and create supplemental material that would go into greater detail about Junko yet. So you'd just be forced to accept that Junko somehow plunged the entire world into despair. In fact, the only exchange the characters have on what could have started the tragedy just has Junko saying it was an ideological thing. But I guess if there's one thing I can compliment Junko on, it's just that. She's relatable where she really shouldn't be. She's a defeatist who believes misery is the true state of the world and it's pointless to fight against that. I'm not saying I agree with her philosophy, but I understand it. I mean, I'm not sure if it's just because I'm getting more cynical as I get older, but there have been times I've looked at the news or maybe just took the time to stop and observe everything around me and felt hopelessness to the point of apathy. I know I'm not alone in that regard. Junko differs by actually reveling in despair, but the point stands. Danganronpa just exists in a world where this idea is allowed to flourish. That's really what I think is the genius of Junko's character. She really feels more like a force of nature than she does an actual character, and I suppose that's exactly what Kodaka was going for. She was intentionally created without a tragic backstory or anything for the player to sympathize with, and while I think that really boils her character down to being nothing more than a plot device, she serves her purpose well. It's corny, but she's the symbol of despair that our heroes ultimately triumph over with hope. That said, I still think the reason behind the killing game is stupid. Junko was evil just for evil's sake. Some people might say that's the point, and to them I say, fair enough, it still feels like lazy writing. Out of all the things I've had an issue with since playing Danganronpa the first time, I think it's safe to say I've come around on Junko the most, or at least I have a better understanding of her character now. I still don't think she's a great villain, but I don't need her to be deep or profound or justified in a story that's already nonsensical as this. As much as I was hyping Danganronpa for being a battle royale story that leans into its cartoon violence earlier, it's really a murder mystery more than anything else. And I think it hits the mark when it comes to being a mystery just as well as it does being a battle royale story. In the class trials, there's the typical investigating crime scenes and presenting evidence to out a culprit like you would in any other whodunit. But when it comes to the game's larger questions of why are we trapped in the school and who's doing this to us, I think they found the sweet spot of being too obvious and too ambiguous that keeps you just engaged enough. The answers aren't in your face, and you're not going to have all or most of the details until the last chapter of the game. But if you pay attention to the little things, the stuff that'll have you wondering, how did I miss this on my first playthrough? You'll have answered some questions on your own before the finale. My thoughts on Danganronpa haven't really changed since I played it last. I did want a little more from the class trials and villains motive-wise, but it's still a pretty immersive game despite those criticisms. The story is still secondary to the characters though. The message of the game boils down to a cliche, don't give up hope, and unfortunately I think Trigger Happy Havoc is a game best experienced if you don't try to take a greater meaning from the story beyond that. But who am I to tell you how to enjoy your video games? I don't know if I'd recommend everyone buy this game, but whether you're a fan of the art style, or you just want to scratch that Phoenix Wright itch, I will say there's something here for everyone to enjoy. Kodaka is a very inspired man, and it shows, but I think the team behind this game still managed to be ambitious in their own ways. That's about all I have to say about Danganronpa though. Oh, wait! I forgot about that mode. Once you beat the game, you unlock something called School Mode, which is perfect for anyone who hates the killing game. This is a simple game mode where you build new and unique variants of Monokuma for Monokuma by searching for parts all over the school. You don't actually search for the parts though, you just manage everyone's time between searching, resting, and cleaning. It also doubles as a dating sim if you're into that. And hey, I get it. You're allowed to spend free time with the other students here too, just like in the main game, except you know there isn't the possibility of them dying, so you can fill out their report cards. It's nothing special, but it's a fun way to waste time. But that's it for Trigger Happy Havoc, so where do we go from here? Danganronpa 2. Thank you for watching this far if you're still here. I'm gonna start uploading these reviews or analysis or whatever you want to call it videos like this more often. There's a bunch of games I want to share my thoughts on, and the Danganronpa series just happened to cross my mind first. Anyways, I'd love to read what you guys' thoughts were on this video. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again soon.